ritual impurity and some of the categories that the priestly system works with. So there's kind of like there's two different polarities in the priestly system, and we don't want to get these confused. One is holy versus profane, right? Holy, what is holy? Holy is, first of all, God's presence. So holy is what's consecrated, what's set apart to be in the presence of God or to serve in the presence of God. So the priests are holy, right? The people of Israel are called holy. They're people set apart for God, but even within that people, there are the priests then that are set apart to mediate on behalf of the people at large. So that's the holy. Holy is this set apart category that has been specially consecrated to be with God, to be in the presence of God. Profane is the common, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just the common everyday kind of thing, not holy. So if you think about the week, the structure of the week, the Sabbath is the holy day. The other 6 days of the week are profane. They're common. They're normal. Doesn't mean that they're bad. Most people spend most of their life, right? The vast majority of Israelites spend the most of their life as profane, right? In some sense, in a common state, not necessarily in a special holy state. So that's holy and profane. The other category, which we don't want to confuse with that, is impure or unclean versus pure or clean, right? And these are also not moral categories. This is very important to grasp. A lot of people, especially Christians, make mistakes with ritual purity when they start to import moral ideas to like unclean versus clean. These again are two categories, states that people would be in. So the idea is that you would actually vacillate between clean and unclean in everyday life. For example, you might be, you're in a clean state one day, but maybe maybe you're married and you have relations that night. Then you're in an unclean state for a short period. Or you're a male and you have a nocturnal emission, or you're a woman and you're on your monthly cycle, menstruation, or you give birth to a child, right? Or you have a kind of disease that needs to be healed. You need to be healed from, or needs to be taken care of ritually. So the idea is it's not a moral thing. The only time when it becomes an issue of sin is if you ignore the statutes around clean and unclean. So if, for example, if you're in a state where you know you're ritually unclean and you go bring your sacrifice to the temple, well, now you've sinned. Now you've transgressed that. But it's not a moral thing to be in an unclean state. That'd be just a common, it's a common aspect of life. Everybody will be in states of uncleanness at various points. The key is that if you're going into the holy place, right, or if you're going to the space of holiness, where God's kavod dwells, you can't bring uncleanness there. So these are, again, I think, by God's gracious regulations for keeping facets of, I'll describe this more in a moment, but just keeping facets of our human mortality away from the divine presence. It can't be in the space of God's kavod. So to reiterate, unclean or impure is not a moral category. It's a category one would be in for a variety of different reasons: childbirth, leprosy, seminal emissions, menstruation, corpse impurity. So if you're burying a loved one, which absolutely you would do, right? You'd be a horrible lawbreaker if you didn't bury your relative and take care of them. So the law Leviticus assumes that you're going to be unclean sometimes. It's not a problem. It only becomes a problem if you say, I'm going to come in an unclean state into the holy place. All right, so what's the logic of this? What's God trying to teach his people? Again, Leviticus doesn't tell us, right? But if we look at the various categories, I think that a pretty good explanation emerges, right? Jacob Milgram was kind of the first, again, to suggest, well, maybe all of these categories have to do with death, right? And certainly some of that fits really well. Corpse and purity. Well, of course, okay, a dead body is, it's obviously dead, so it has to do with death and the pollution that comes from the corpse. And then leprosy, you can see clearly they connected leprosy to death. So it's a kind of marker of death. As the skin, this white kind of flaky skin disease, it's the idea of like dead skin, dying skin. And so it's a picture of death in some way. But what about like childbirth or some of these other things? They don't all seem to fit perfectly into strictly around this idea of death. But if we broaden it out a little bit more and we think just kind of more in the terms of the category of human mortality, then I think we can make sense of all of these various things. Childbirth, well, how are people born? I mean, how do people come into the world in a state of mortality? You're born through natural childbirth. Same thing with, seminal emissions, menstruation. These have to do with life, or if you like, the release of the fluids that would create life, and so they're not being used to create life, so maybe you can connect those to death in some way as well. But the idea here is I think it's all connected to mortality, that Leviticus is dealing with us, humanity, in our current state that is subject to death, right? Now, when you look at some authors who are thinking about another state, like some New Testament authors that are now thinking about the resurrection state, well, what do you notice is absent there? Jesus says, they're not, neither will they marry or be given in marriage, because they're going to be like the angels. So when Jesus is talking about resurrection life, human beings are still male and female, but they no longer relate to each other as we do in the old creation. There's no sex, it appears. And the purpose of sex primarily is procreation, right? But procreation in a world where everyone dies, right? But once you're in a state of immortality, right, resurrection life, there's no more procreation through sex. So all of these categories, I think, are dealing with, again, we don't have the perfect explanation, but I think the best explanation is all of these categories are really dealing with human mortality and how it is that, again, human beings who are subject to death, mortal by nature, how they can dwell with God who is immortal, right? And how can God's divine kavod be in the space with human beings who are subject to the vicissitudes of life and ultimately to death, right? Well, the full answer to that in the Bible is resurrection life, right? That it's through resurrection life that we are fully transformed to be forever in the presence of God. And Hebrews tells us Jesus is the first human, the one who's there on our behalf, mediating until we are all transformed to be like he is.